Hi, I'm Kristen Brandt, and today we're going to be talking about cities across the world. In particular, we're going to focus on these mega cities slash meta cities, and what we want to talk about how they're increasingly located in the periphery and semi-periphery. But before we do that, I want you to kind of do a little mental mapping with me. Can you picture New York City? How about Tokyo? London? What do those cities look like? What do they have in common? Now I want you to think about Rio de Janeiro, Mumbai, Mexico City. Do they look the same as those other cities? Why? Why not? Well, today we're going to explore that a little more in depth. So let's get going. What are we going to learn? Well, what we are going to learn is that we've seen a trend across the world over time. We're going to talk about the fact that we are seeing people move from rural areas to urban areas in an unprecedented rates. I mean, take a look in the 1960s, how many people were living in urban areas compared to how many are living in urban areas today. You probably have already talked about those pull factors, jobs, healthcare. That's why people are moving to those cities. But what's happening once they're there? Well, clearly they're growing. So there's two big terms, mega cities and meta cities. We're talking about cities with more than 10 or 20 million residents. They're huge. I mean, some of these cities have more than the state that I live in, the state of Illinois. And so what we want to take a look at, though, is how does that impact areas? When we talk about the impact of these mega or meta cities, how does that impact transportation? Do we have enough roads available? Do we have to buy more roads? What does that do to congestion? How about housing production? Can we keep up with the demand? Affordability? Landscape preferences. Where are these homes being built in these mega and meta cities? Are they being built within the city or outside the city? What materials are being used? And then how is that impacting the social and demographic trends of cities? In other words, what's happening within our male and female relationships? What's happening with our birth rates, our death rates? So let's take a look at where these mega cities are even located. I want you to notice a trend. Take a look in 1950. Where do you see the majority of these mega cities located? Do you notice that the majority are located in the Northern Hemisphere? That the majority are located in what we would call core countries? Fast forward 50 years. What do you notice? Look how they shift. Look at Latin America. Look at Africa. Look at that shift out of the Northern Hemisphere to Southern Hemisphere. And then 15 years after that, take a look. Where do we see those cities? Look at those changes. How does that impact the people that live there and the infrastructure in which helps those people move forward? It puts a lot of regional pressure on those areas. So if we take a look at people living in urban areas in 2017, take a look at we start really kind of looking at those regional areas. So we're looking at North America, look at Latin America, look at Southwest Asia, the pressure that that's going to put on them. But that doesn't really give us enough information. I feel like we need to dig a little bit deeper. So where else do we see things that are happening? So we have our mega cities. Look at the red dots here in 2015. But then we also add in where's 1 to 5 million, where's 5 to 10 million. Look at these areas along the coast. Look at the areas in South Asia, in East Asia. How is that impacting? What types of countries are we noticing? And where we see the bulk of these mega and meta cities occurring, we see them in what we would call our periphery and semi-periphery countries. What does that look like? What does it mean for those countries? So what we do know is that we do start to see countries that are, we would say, are kind of highly where they live impoverished, so we see a lot of poverty, we tend to see that's where we're seeing the greatest shift into urbanization. Now, when you look at your demographic transition model, we also know that as we shift from stage 2 and into stage 3 and 4 and become more urban, that should alleviate some of the pressures of poverty, because people should have more access to jobs and medical resources, more access to education. And this report from the World Cities, UN World Cities report, you do see how that level of urbanization does start to, the more urbanized, the less people that are living in poverty. However, as that shift occurs in our periphery and semi-periphery areas, we are seeing the strains it's putting on those countries. So for example, when I look at Nigeria, which we would consider in a periphery country, we know that access to resources can be strained, in particular thinking about sanitation. How about access to water? In the image on the right, do you see the well? We do see some power lines that have made it to some of these areas where people are living. But at this time, a lot of the resources looks like are being shared the closer to that central business district. We're going to explore this in more detail when we look at future units. Take a look at Nairobi, Kenya, kind of some of the same concepts of the resources in downtown in that central business district. But take a look at the image on the right when we talk about infrastructure. Look at the road. Look at the materials that people are using to build their homes. Resources are being pumped into the central business district, and at that rapid rate, the landscape issues and the pressures that are being placed on the outskirts of town are really too great to keep up with the demand. We also look at the semi-periphery, Brazil, and in particular, Rio de Janeiro. Take a look at how this city has developed along the coastline. At first glance, very modern, taking a look at those urban structures. But when we examine closer, we see, and we're going to talk more about the favelas later on, I believe it is in 6.10, where we're going to really dig into looking at those. But what we're seeing here is we're building into the mountains. How do we get people to and from work? How do we even get materials to those areas? Building those homes becomes quite the challenge. People keep moving to the cities because this is where the jobs are. This is where the opportunity lies to help your family move ahead. How about Mumbai, India? Was this the image you pictured earlier on at the beginning of the video? Or did you picture something more like this, where we see homes being built at rapid rates, where we see crowded streets, the movement of goods on bikes, where we see the pressures and the constraints of limited land availability to really make this accessible for people. So let's think about this. Is there a relationship between population growth in megacities and in less developed countries? Well, that relationship is the more that the population is growing, so does the growth of cities. This is where jobs are available. We can only have so many farmers on the amount of land that we've always had. Well, we know that that then puts pressure on the people that are living there already. And so what we see, they're growing at these rapid rates because this is where the jobs are located. This is where the resources are. This is where education is available, more readily available for the people of those countries. And so what we hope is that as we transition into more urban areas and they have more access, it should help move a country into stage 3, into stage 4, and it should start to slow those birth rates because you don't have the space. I don't need as many kids to farm, and I do have more accessibility to education. And so that's what I really want you to take away, is what are some of those similarities and differences across those locations? We focused a lot on similarities today of the pressures placed on periphery and semi-periphery countries when we talk about transportation, housing production, those landscape preferences such as the homes and how we were able to build them with the resources that are available, those social and demographic trends. We're going to dive into taking a look at what megacities look like at the core level in future videos. I want to thank you for tuning in today, and I look forward to seeing you. Hi, I'm Kristen Brandt, and today we're going to continue looking at cities across the world with our second video. What we want to really dig into today is kind of this idea of that's happening more in the core, this idea of suburbanization and how it's creating some new landforms, such as these edge cities, exurbs, and boom burbs. Lots of vocabulary for us to explore, and it does create some new challenges. So let's kind of jump right in. What is it we're going to learn? So this is a review from video 1. And what we did in video 1 is we talked about megacities and metacities. So these really large cities and the pressures that they're putting on our central business districts and our countries, particularly in the periphery and the semi-periphery. Today, we're going to really probably focusing in the United States in particular, but a lot of this can be applied to when we look at our core countries as well. Because what we see is this unrestricted growth, right? Urban sprawl. When we talk about commercial development, these roads over large expanse of land, and we're going to see what pressures that's actually placing on a specific country and area. We also talk about this movement of people, in particular upper and middle class, from core areas. And what we mean by the urban core areas, think of your central business district, think of those really highly urban areas, but they're moving out to the outskirts of town and what that means for developments of cities. So these next two terms, you're going to hear us in other videos kind of referencing them. I would say boom burbs are kind of the trendy term right now. Those rapidly growing suburban cities, they represent this new metropolitan form. I'm sure as teenagers right now, you're going, well, that means like nothing to me. We're going to dig into it. And what it really means is it's kind of going to lead us towards this idea of edge cities. So take a look at this edge city. And I know I skipped exurb. I'm going to come back to it. But what we see in edge cities are these economic centers around on the fringe of a city. And so I don't really have to go into the center area because I can go to the edge city. So then when I go back and talk about what is an exurb, I'm going to say these are the prosperous residential areas beyond the suburbs. I can work from home. I don't have to go all the way into the city because these edge cities or these boom burbs have developed. So let's take a closer look because my guess is you're going, this is a lot of vocabulary, Mrs. Brandt. What am I going to do with it? Let's look. So the first thing is, what is an edge city? And really, I think this connects to everything we're looking at. As these cities grow, okay, and these urban centers grow, they can't keep up with all the pressures. So what we see are these cities or these boom burbs that develop along the edge. And so they typically follow the transportation lines. Take a look at these road lines and they crisscross, but they're going to bring people, this is bringing people out. And then this beltway, the roads that kind of circle and connect everything around, help us to connect to these other areas. And what we see is that things are developing outside of the central business district. So for example, not all of our medical centers and office parks are in the central business district anymore, or those areas of high technology or retail or airports. What's happening is they're moving out to the edges along these belt lines, along the roadways, because the pressures and the time that it takes to get into town are not always worth it, when a lot of times their consumers are in those burbs. Also, land costs, when we talk about that bid rent theory, that we talked about that in our agriculture unit, that doesn't go away. The closer we get to the city, the more expensive it is. And so a lot of times these resources then move to the outskirts of town. So let's look at some examples of what those terms are like in real life. So for example, when we talk about urban sprawl, we talk about that unrestricted growth where these cities are kind of growing at all costs and really at the expense of taking over some of our farmland, as you can see in the picture on the right. What we see is that the pressures that this places on our urban centers is quite great. We've even seen, as far as transportation methods, we need to continue to build roads to move people in and out of these areas. We need to build more mass transit methods so that we can get people to and from them. We are constantly looking for ways to help people move from the urban core to the burbs. However, sometimes we create kind of our own little cities, right? Those edge cities on the outskirts, so we don't have to get all the way in. But we still need ways to move people in and out. We have seen this unbelievable growth in our suburbs over the last roughly 20 years in most of our areas. Take a look at Pittsburgh and Detroit. When we look at Pittsburgh and Detroit, we know that deindustrialization is taking place, and that is going to be covered in some other units. But when we look at things such as Charlotte, Dallas, Austin, they're growing at unbelievable rates. And so, how do we keep up with those demands for resources and goods? Well, what ends up happening are this idea of boom burbs, and I'm going to connect them to edge cities as well. So, for example, Irvine, California grew 25% between the years 2010 and 2016, where Irving, Texas grew roughly 13%. It's part of that Dallas-Fort Worth metroplex. Well, why is this important? Well, when I look at these two cities, and no one's going to test you on the name of these two cities, but what they're going to ask you is, how does that impact the central business area? How does this impact that urban core? A lot of these resources have moved out to these areas. We've had to build all the other infrastructure to make these cities functioning. We need to make sure that they have adequate police, adequate fire. We need to make sure that they have fire protection. We need to make sure that they have your electrical, your water, your sewer, all of those resources. And then let's add in schools and activities. In fact, California and Texas here with these two cities have done such a great job that both of these cities have been ranked at some point or another as some of the best places to live. In the 1990s, Norfolk, Virginia was on the cutting edge of really this idea of a boom burb. You know, when we take a look at it, it was really on that upper echelon of starting to take off. It has slowed down a little bit, but we're still seeing that they anticipate a 30% growth in jobs, which is going to cause people to continue to move to those areas. Well, why do they move to those areas? And if we took a closer look at many of them, they'd be connected to what we call edge cities. Atlanta is kind of like our case study of what an edge city might look like, because when you look at this map, can you see the interstates that run through the center of Atlanta? How about the beltway that circles, that connects those interstates? Let's take a closer look. So the Atlanta is our central business district, and this is where in the past all of our resources kind of been clustered together. We would look for highways that would move us in and out of that city. Well, we know that's going to be kind of a pain. So they then built the Beltway. So let's move, we don't have to go through the central business district, we can kind of skirt those edges. So then what we look at is, where do these areas intersect? And we start to see different cities develop along those intersections. And each of these cities, these edge cities, these boom burbs, offer different things, such as down by College Park, we know that there's an airport. Do you know that it takes almost at least a good half hour to get into the city of Atlanta, even though you're flying into the Atlanta International Airport? Or how about, we're going to build some malls. You don't have to go shopping in downtown Atlanta. You can go to Tucker and go to one of their malls. Or how about the Braves? They used to be located in downtown Atlanta, and then they've moved their stadium out to Marietta. The whole point of what I'm trying to share with you here is that these edge cities make it so that you don't always have to go into the urban area, the urban core, because these cities have a lot to offer. So two real life examples as well. Tyson's Corner, Virginia. You can see this roadway pretty clear. Take a look at the interstate exchanges. In fact, this is considered the Fairfax County's crossroads. This is where all the goods kind of move themselves through Fairfax County. Schaumburg, Illinois is a suburb outside of Chicago, located pretty close to where I live. And I will tell you, Woodfield Mall is located there. It's close to O'Hare. And a lot of the restaurants that are located in Schaumburg are the same restaurants that are available in downtown Chicago. It's much easier for me to drive up to Schaumburg than to have to truck it into Chicago to go experience some of those things. And what's made all of this kind of happen? These idea of exurbs, right? So these prosperous areas that really focus on putting the wealth in these certain areas, because technology has allowed people to work from home, that they don't have to commute as much, they can telecommute. And so then they want those resources closer to where they are, not having to always go into that urban core. So when we talk about practicing, we take a look at an FRQ here, and it really is asking us to look at two ways that the spatial organization of commercial land use is different between the original business district and an edge city. And things that we would talk about is in an edge city, we're going to see maybe lower density. We're going to see not as many skyscrapers. We'll see it spread out a little bit more, but we're also probably going to see more big box stores. We're going to see more specializing in some of these edge cities, probably more open parking lots, definitely newer construction. And so these are the things that we really start to see that open up opportunities for people on those in those edge cities. There's a lot of vocabulary, and I'm going to show you the correct answers here. But the goal is not to memorize each one of them. The goal is to understand that when we talk about a boom burb, those rapidly suburban cities that represent the new metropolitan form, that they're really connected to being an edge city. They're oftentimes on the fringe where those interstate exchanges take place. Why did these things happen? A lot of times that they happen because of the mega cities and the meta cities. They're pressures that they've put on it. They've caused unrestricted growth in those areas with urban sprawl, which oftentimes has led to an exurb, those prosperous areas beyond, because technology has allowed people to work more flexibility and not needing to be in the central business district. I really hope you enjoyed tuning in today.